The rain in Manhattan didn't fall. It attacked. It came sideways, slamming against the tall glass windows of the probate courtroom like fists demanding entry. Thunder rolled between the skyscrapers, echoing off steel and stone, turning the city into a drum. And inside that courtroom, my brothers tried to erase me. My client, their attorney said smoothly, adjusting his navy tie, is not mentally competent to manage the inheritance left to her by her late father. The words hung in the air like smoke. Not competent. Not stable. Not fit. I sat perfectly still at the defense table, fingers laced together in my lap, my pulse steady. If they wanted crazy, they'd have to do better than that. Across the aisle, Ethan and Mark, my older brothers, didn't look at me. Ethan's jaw was tight, his expensive watch flashing under the fluorescent lights. Mark stared at his phone like he was waiting for a stock update instead of trying to strip his sister of her legal rights. Outside, sirens wailed down Center Street. Taxis splashed through puddles. Somewhere nearby, a street vendor was probably still selling pretzels under a soaked umbrella. New York never stopped moving, even when your own blood tried to bury you alive. I'm Olivia Harper, 32, born and raised in Queens, Columbia graduate, hospital systems analyst at St. Vincent's Medical Center, daughter of Richard Harper, real estate developer, self-made millionaire, and the only person who ever truly believed I could build something of my own. He died 6 months ago. Heart attack. No warning. 1 minute he was arguing with a contractor about zoning permits in Brooklyn. The next he was on a stretcher under harsh emergency lights. I was the one who got the call. I was also the one who found out what he'd left behind. The Harper estate, 3 commercial properties in Manhattan, 2 brownstones in Brooklyn, and a controlling stake in a private medical investment firm worth tens of millions. But that wasn't the shock. The shock was the will. Dad left 40% to me, 30% to Ethan, 30% to Mark, and a clause, one very specific clause, that said my inheritance would remain fully under my independent control. No co-management, no guardianship, no oversight. My brothers smiled at the reading of the will. But it wasn't happiness. It was calculation. 3 weeks later, I got served. Petition for mental competency review. Filed by Ethan Harper. Co-signed by Mark Harper. Grounds. Documented emotional instability following the traumatic death of our father, erratic professional decisions, and concern over financial mismanagement. I remember staring at the paperwork in my Tribeca apartment while the city buzzed below. I read it 3 times. Emotional instability? Erratic decisions? I worked 60 hours a week analyzing hospital infrastructure budgets. I paid my mortgage early. I ran marathons. But I had done one thing they didn't like. I had declined Ethan's offer to merge my inheritance into a shared LLC he controlled. It's just easier this way, Liv, he'd said over dinner in Soho. You're not exactly experienced with high-stakes investment management. Translation? You're the little sister. Stay small. When I refused, the temperature changed. And now here we were. Back in court, the judge peered over his glasses. Mr. Caldwell, he said to their attorney, mental incompetency is not a casual accusation. Of course not, Your Honor, Caldwell replied smoothly. We have medical testimony prepared. Medical testimony? I felt my stomach tighten. I leaned toward my lawyer, Sandra Kim, sharp, composed, ruthless in a quiet way. They don't have anything, I whispered. Sandra's expression didn't change. They filed an emergency psychiatric evaluation from a consulting physician, she said softly. What? You were admitted to St. Vincent's for observation 3 months ago. I blinked. No, I wasn't. She turned her eyes to me slowly. Olivia, it's signed. The air thinned. 3 months ago, I had gone to St. Vincent's. But not as a patient. As staff. Unless. Memory flickered. That night. The elevator. The sudden dizziness. I had fainted in the administrative wing after working 18 hours straight on a systems migration. They'd taken me downstairs. I'd woken up in a bed. A nurse said it was dehydration. I signed discharge papers and left. I never saw the chart. I never requested the file. My brothers were staring at me now. Ethan's lips curled almost imperceptibly. They had something, and I had no idea what it was. Court recessed for the day. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist. Steam rose from subway grates. The city smelled like wet asphalt and coffee. Sandra and I walked toward Foley Square. They're claiming you experienced dissociative symptoms, she said calmly. that you exhibited paranoia and erratic speech. I stopped walking. That's insane. I know. Who signed that report? She hesitated. Dr. Leonard Voss. The name hit me like a brick. Dr. Voss wasn't just any physician. He was a psychiatric consultant contracted through my father's medical investment firm, which meant my brothers had access to hospital staff, to records, to influence. This is strategic, Sandra said. They don't need to prove you're unstable forever. Just unstable enough to place temporary financial conservatorship over your assets. Under Ethan's control, I finished. Yes. The city noise roared around us. Horns, construction drills, fragments of conversations in a dozen languages. New York was built on power. And power didn't fight fair. That night, I couldn't sleep. From my apartment balcony, I watched headlights crawl along the FDR Drive. The East River reflected broken shards of light from passing boats. I thought about Dad, about the way he used to take me to Yankees games in the Bronx. Ethan always talked business with him. Mark always talked about cars. I talked about people, about systems, about fairness. Dad once told me, "You see things others don't live. That's your strength." Maybe that's why they needed to label me unstable. Because I saw them. 2 days later, the preliminary hearing began. Dr. Voss took the stand. Silver hair, calm voice, professional. He testified that during my admission, I had displayed elevated emotional volatility, fixation on perceived betrayal, and impaired judgment. Betrayal? Fixation? My jaw clenched. Sandra cross-examined him carefully. "Doctor, how long did you observe Ms. Harper?" "Approximately 40 minutes. And you diagnosed her based on that? Combined with reported behavioral patterns." "Reported by whom?" A pause. "Family members." There it was. Ethan avoided my eyes. Mark shifted in his seat. Sandra pressed harder. "Doctor, were you aware that Ms. Harper is employed at St. Vincent's in a senior administrative role?" "Yes." "And did that influence your assessment?" "No." "Did you personally inform her of this diagnosis?" Silence. "No." The courtroom murmured. But it wasn't enough. The judge ordered a formal competency evaluation to be completed within 30 days. And pending review? Temporary financial restrictions. My accounts were frozen. My voting rights in the medical firm suspended. Ethan smiled. Just slightly. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered. New York loves scandal. "Olivia, is it true you're being evaluated for mental instability? Did grief affect your judgment? Are your brothers protecting the estate?" Flashes exploded. I kept walking. Sandra shielded me as we got into a black town car. Inside, I finally let my mask slip. "They planned this," I said quietly. "Yes." "How deep does it go?" "I don't know yet." I stared out the window as we drove down Broadway. Neon signs flickered. Tourists laughed under umbrellas. Life moved on. But something inside me shifted. They wanted to paint me as unstable? Fine. Let them underestimate me. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that I had access to something they never considered. Hospital systems, digital audit trails, administrative override logs. If Dr. Voss falsified anything, if someone altered my medical file, there would be footprints, and I intended to find them. 3 nights later, I sat alone in my office at St. Vincent's. The hospital at 2 a.m. is a different world. Dim corridors, the smell of antiseptic and burnt coffee, monitors beeping in distant rooms, nurses whispering at stations under soft blue light. I logged into the archival system. My credentials still worked. For now. I pulled my patient ID from that night. There it was. Admission record. Psych evaluation. Diagnosis. Acute stress-induced psychotic episode. My breath caught. That was never discussed with me. I opened metadata. Last modified, 2 weeks after discharge. Modified by Elvas_MD. Timestamp, 11:42 p.m. Location, remote access. Remote? Why would a consulting psychiatrist access my file remotely at midnight weeks later? Unless someone asked him to. I dug deeper. Audit logs showed an external IP routed through a private network associated with Harper Medical Investments. My father's firm. Now controlled operationally by Ethan. My pulse steadied. This wasn't grief. This wasn't instability. This was fraud. And fraud left trails. As I copied the logs onto an encrypted drive, footsteps echoed behind me. Slow. Measured. I turned. At the end of the corridor stood a tall figure in a charcoal overcoat. Hospital Director Michael Reyes. He wasn't supposed to be here at this hour. He stepped forward into the light. "Olivia," he said calmly, "we need to talk about what you're doing." My heart pounded once. "Hard." "Director Reyes," I replied evenly. "Working late." His eyes flicked to my screen. Then back to me. "You shouldn't be accessing those files. Those files are mine." A beat of silence. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "They're not anymore." And that was the moment I realized. This wasn't just my brothers. This went higher. Much higher. And if I was going to survive this war, I would need more than proof. I would need someone powerful enough to stand in court and tell the truth. But I had no idea yet that the very man standing in front of me would one day be forced to take the stand. Against them. Against the hospital. And maybe against himself. The fluorescent lights above us hummed like they were holding their breath. The hallway outside the administrative wing of St. Vincent's Medical Center was nearly empty at 2:17 a.m. A janitor's cart squeaked somewhere down the corridor. A cardiac monitor beeped faintly from a distant room. The city outside the windows never slept, but inside these walls, secrets preferred the dark. Hospital Director Michael Reyes stood 10 feet away from me, hands folded in front of his overcoat, expression unreadable. "They're not your files anymore," he had said. The words echoed in my head. I slowly closed the laptop screen halfway, not enough to hide it, but enough to signal I wasn't surrendering. "I'm still an employee here," I said calmly, "and I'm accessing my own patient record." Reyes took a few steps forward. He was in his early 50s, impeccably composed, with the kind of presence that could calm a boardroom or terrify one. "Your access privileges were reviewed this afternoon," he replied. "Your clearance level has been temporarily reduced." "On whose authority?" He didn't hesitate. The board, which included a major investor. Harper Medical Investments. My father's company, now strategically maneuvered by Ethan. My chest tightened, not with fear but clarity. "This is about the probate case," I said. Reyes didn't deny it. Instead, he stepped closer and lowered his voice. "You need to stop digging." There it was. Not a threat. A warning. "Are you protecting the hospital?" I asked. His eyes flickered, just for a second. "Olivia, there are forces at play you don't understand." I stood up slowly. "With respect, Director Reyes, I understand perfectly. My medical file was altered 2 weeks after discharge. Remotely, by a contracted psychiatrist tied to my father's investment firm." He held my gaze. "That allegation could destroy careers. It could also save mine." Silence stretched between us. Then, to my surprise, he said quietly, "Go home." That was it. No security. No confiscation. Just go home. Which meant one thing. He wasn't fully against me. But he wasn't on my side either. Not yet. Manhattan before sunrise has a different heartbeat. The city hums instead of roars. Delivery trucks unload produce. Early commuters clutch coffee cups as steam rises from subway grates. The sky over the East River fades from black to deep violet. I walked out of St. Vincent's with a flash drive in my coat pocket and a storm building inside me. By the time I reached my apartment in Tribeca, I had made a decision. If they were escalating this into institutional warfare, I would respond strategically, not emotionally. At 6:30 a.m., I called Sandra Kim. She answered on the second ring. "You found something." It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Tell me." I explained the altered timestamps, the remote access, the IP trace linked to Harper Medical Investments. She was silent for a full 5 seconds. "That's not just unethical," she finally said. "That's criminal. They're trying to medically manufacture incompetence. If we prove that, the conservatorship collapses. And Ethan? He could face fraud charges." The thought didn't bring satisfaction. Just gravity. They weren't just attacking my finances. They were rewriting my identity. And that crossed a line. 3 days later, the formal psychiatric evaluation was scheduled. Court appointed. Neutral. Conducted at a private facility on the Upper East Side. The waiting room smelled like lavender and old books. Soft classical music played overhead. The walls were painted a calming gray that felt strangely suffocating. Dr. Hannah Whitmore entered precisely at 9 a.m. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, composed. "Ms. Harper," she greeted. "I understand this evaluation carries stakes." "That's one word for it," I replied. The session lasted nearly 4 hours. She asked about my childhood, my father, my brothers, grief, work stress, trust, anger. When she asked if I believed anyone was conspiring against me, I held her gaze steadily. Yes, I said. And why do you believe that? Because they altered my medical records. She didn't react outwardly. Do you have evidence? Yes. And how does that make you feel? Focused. Not furious. Not unstable. Focused. She made a note. Meanwhile, Ethan made his next move. Sandra called me that evening. They've filed a supplemental motion. For what? To introduce testimony from an internal hospital compliance officer. My stomach dropped. Who? David Klein. David. My former colleague. We had worked side by side for 2 years. He knew my work ethic. My temperament. He also knew how much pressure the board could apply. They're going to say you exhibited erratic behavior at work, Sandra said. Did I? No. Then what are they using? Anonymous staff complaints. Of course. In New York, reputation travels faster than truth. The next court date arrived with clear skies and sharp winter air. Outside the courthouse, news vans lined the curb. Harper Heiress mental fitness hearing continues. I caught a glimpse of myself on a monitor inside one of the vans. They had chosen an unflattering photo. Eyes tired. Expression hardened. Narratives are easy to sell, especially when they involve money. Inside the courtroom, David took the stand. He avoided looking at me. Mr. Klein, Caldwell began. Did you observe concerning behavior from Ms. Harper in the months following her father's death? David cleared his throat. She seemed distracted. Define distracted. She questioned administrative decisions aggressively. Aggressively. Sandra stood. Mr. Klein, isn't it true that Ms. Harper raised concerns about vendor contract discrepancies? Yes, but. And those discrepancies were later validated during audit? Yes. So her aggression led to cost savings for the hospital? Yes. A ripple went through the courtroom. Sandra pressed further. Did Ms. Harper ever exhibit delusions? Hallucinations? Violent outbursts? No. Did she fail to perform her job duties? No. Did she ever require psychiatric intervention during employment? No. Caldwell objected. Overruled. David looked ashamed. He wasn't part of a conspiracy. He was part of pressure. There's a difference. Then something unexpected happened. Caldwell called a new witness. Director Michael Reyes. The room shifted. Reyes walked to the stand with measured calm. He took the oath. My pulse quickened. Was he going to bury me? Or save himself? Director Reyes, Caldwell began. Are you aware of Ms. Harper accessing restricted medical files after her privileges were reduced? Reyes glanced briefly at me. Yes. Would you characterize that as stable professional behavior? He paused. The courtroom felt suddenly smaller. I would characterize it, Reyes said carefully, as someone attempting to understand why her personal medical record was altered. The air cracked. Caldwell stiffened. Altered. Reyes exhaled slowly. Yes. There was a post-discharge modification. My brothers froze. Sandra didn't move. Caldwell recovered quickly. Director, are you suggesting misconduct? I'm suggesting, Reyes replied, that an internal review may be warranted. That was not what Ethan expected. Not at all. Court adjourned early. Outside, the winter sun reflected off the glass towers downtown. Sandra grabbed my arm. That was huge. He didn't fully commit, I said. He didn't have to. He cracked the door. Across the plaza, Ethan and Mark argued in low voices. For the first time since this began, they looked uncertain. That night, I received an anonymous email. Subject line, stop. No greeting. No signature. Just one sentence. If you continue digging, more than your inheritance will disappear. Attached was a photo, taken from across the street, of me entering my apartment building. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just financial warfare anymore. This was intimidation. And whoever sent that email wanted me scared. Instead, I felt something else. Resolve. They underestimated something fundamental. I grew up in New York. You don't survive this city by folding. You survive by adapting. And if they thought they could push me into silence, they were about to discover exactly how wrong they were. Because I wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. I was building a case. And soon, very soon, the hospital director wouldn't just suggest an internal review. He would be subpoenaed, forced, to tell the truth under oath. And when that moment came, the entire structure my brothers built would start to collapse. But I didn't yet know the cost. And neither did they. The first time I realized this wasn't just about money was the night my apartment door was left slightly open. Not wide, not broken, just unlatched. Enough to make you question your own memory. It was a bitter February night in Manhattan. Wind whipped down the narrow streets of Tribeca, rattling scaffolding and slamming taxi doors shut. The skyline glittered like nothing was wrong. Like billion-dollar deals weren't being negotiated in penthouses. Like siblings weren't plotting to legally erase their sister. I stood outside my apartment, staring at the door. I always locked it. Always. Slowly, I pushed it open. The lights were off. Nothing overturned. Nothing obviously missing. But something felt different. The air. The silence. That subtle sense that someone had stood where you're standing and looked at the things you love. I stepped inside carefully. My laptop was on the kitchen island. Closed, but slightly rotated from where I'd left it. My pulse steadied instead of racing. This wasn't a burglary. It was a message. You're being watched. I walked straight to the bedroom. My closet doors were slightly ajar. My safe, hidden behind winter coats, was untouched. Which meant they weren't looking for money. They were looking for something else. Or they wanted me to think they were. I grabbed my phone and called Sandra. "Change your locks," she said immediately. "And we file a police report." "No," I said calmly. A pause. "Olivia, if I file a report, Ethan's attorneys will frame it as paranoia." Silence. She hated that I was right. "This escalates things," she said quietly. It already escalated. The next morning, I walked into St. Vincent's Medical Center like nothing had happened. Hospitals are strange ecosystems. Life and death exist side by side with billing codes and cafeteria coffee. Nurses rushed past with clipboards. Doctors murmured diagnoses. Families clung to hope in waiting rooms. And somewhere in this building, someone had altered my psychiatric record. I went straight to my office. Within minutes, my screen lit up with a meeting request. From Michael Reyes. Subject, urgent. I exhaled slowly. Game on. His office overlooked the Hudson River. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Gray sky pressing low over the water. Reyes stood by the glass when I entered. "You shouldn't be alone at night," he said without turning. So he knew. "Is that a warning?" I asked. He faced me. "It's advice. You going to explain why someone accessed my apartment?" His jaw tightened. "You think the hospital broke into your home? I think people with power get creative." He walked to his desk and slid a folder toward me. Internal audit preliminary findings. I opened it. My breath caught. There it was. My original medical report. Unedited. No mention of psychosis. No instability. Diagnosis: acute dehydration and exhaustion. Beneath it, stapled, a revised report. The one submitted to court. Different language. Different conclusion. Same doctor's signature. "What changed?" I asked quietly. Rhea's voice lowered. "Pressure. From Ethan." Yes. There it was. The confirmation. "But that's not all," he added. He flipped to another page. Email correspondence. From Dr. Leonard Voss to Ethan Harper. Subject line: as discussed. Payment transfer confirmation. Private consulting fee. Amount: $250,000. My hands went cold. They bought a diagnosis. Not because I was unstable, but because instability could be manufactured. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. Reyes held my gaze. "Because this hospital is not going down for your brother's greed. And you think I'll protect it? I think you want the truth." He wasn't wrong. But truth has collateral damage. "Will you testify?" I asked. Silence. That would end my career. And save mine. The wind rattled the windows. He looked at the river. "I need time. Time. The one thing I didn't have." That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Dr. Hannah Whitmore called. "Ms. Harper," she said, voice steady. "I've completed my evaluation. And, in my professional opinion, you are fully competent." The words didn't feel triumphant. They felt necessary. "There's more," she added. "I reviewed the prior psychiatric assessment. And it does not align with your presentation, or with standard diagnostic procedure." My heart thudded. "Would you state that in court?" "Yes." Two powerful witnesses. If Reyes committed. If. 3 days later, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread. Media presence doubled. Financial analysts whispered in back rows. New York loves watching empires wobble. Ethan arrived in a tailored navy suit, expression carved from marble. Mark looked less composed. Maybe guilt doesn't wear as well as arrogance. The judge called proceedings to order. Caldwell began confidently, but the momentum shifted quickly. Dr. Whitmore took the stand first. She dismantled the prior diagnosis methodically. In my expert opinion, she stated, the previous assessment reflects bias and external influence. Gasps. Caldwell objected. Overruled. Then Sanders stood. The defense calls Director Michael Reyes. The courtroom stilled. Reyes walked forward. No hesitation this time. He took the oath. I felt my pulse in my fingertips. Director Reyes, Sanders began. Did your internal audit find discrepancies in Ms. Harper's medical file? Yes. Please describe them. He took a breath. The original medical record documented dehydration and exhaustion. The revised record, submitted weeks later, introduced psychiatric terminology unsupported by observed data. Who revised it? Dr. Leonard Voss. Under whose influence? A pause. Every eye locked onto him, including Ethan's. Reyes looked directly at the judge. Based on email correspondence and financial transfers, it appears the revision was coordinated with Mr. Ethan Harper. The room erupted. The judge slammed his gavel. Order. Ethan's face drained of color. Mark stared at the table. Caldwell scrambled. This is speculative. It is documented, Reyes interrupted calmly. Sanders submitted printed copies. Payment confirmations. Emails. Metadata logs. The foundation cracked. Then came the twist none of us expected. Caldwell stood again. Your Honor, he said carefully, even if misconduct occurred, it does not negate legitimate concerns regarding Ms. Harper's decision-making capacity. The judge narrowed his eyes. What concerns? Caldwell turned. Mr. Ethan Harper will take the stand. My stomach tightened. Ethan rarely lost control, which meant this was calculated. He walked up confidently, swore in, and then, he did something I never saw coming. He smiled. Your Honor, he said smoothly, my sister has always been brilliant, driven, passionate. I frowned. But passion, he continued, can become obsession. He turned toward me. She believes I killed our father. The air vanished from the room. What? Sandra whispered. Ethan's expression didn't shift. She accused me, privately, of manipulating his medication, of rushing medical decisions. The courtroom buzzed. That is not true, I said under my breath. Sanders squeezed my arm. But Ethan continued. She's been fixated on this idea for months. Paranoid. Convinced I orchestrated more than just financial strategy. My chest tightened. That conversation. Months ago. In grief. In anger. I had once asked him if he pressured Dad too hard. But murder? No. This was strategic reframing. Paint her as unstable by exaggerating grief-driven questions. Caldwell nodded solemnly. Your Honor, grief can distort perception. The judge turned to me. Ms. Harper, did you accuse your brother of causing your father's death? Every camera pointed at my face. If I denied it too forcefully, they'd call it hysteria. If I hesitated, they'd call it guilt. I stood slowly. I asked questions, I said clearly. Because my father died suddenly. And because financial control shifted immediately. Silence. That is not paranoia, I continued. That is grief mixed with accountability. Ethan's smile faded. Because I wasn't breaking. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't unraveling. I was controlled. Measured. Competent. The judge leaned back. This court will recess. Gavel strike. And just like that, the verdict hung in the balance. Outside, snow began to fall lightly over Manhattan. White flakes against gray steel. Beautiful. Deceptive. As reporters swarmed, Ethan leaned close to me for the first time in weeks. You should have taken the LLC offer, he whispered. I met his eyes. You should have underestimated me more carefully. But as I walked away, I realized something terrifying. If he was willing to imply murder in open court, what else was he willing to do? Because men who feel power slipping don't retreat quietly. And I had just pulled the floor out from under him. The snow didn't last. By morning, Manhattan was soaked in cold rain again. Gray skies pressing low over glass towers, traffic crawling through slick streets, steam rising from subway grates like the city itself was exhaling tension. And tension was everywhere. Inside me. Inside the courtroom. Inside whatever fragile thread still connected me to the two men who shared my blood. Ethan had crossed a line. Accusing me of believing he killed our father wasn't just strategy. It was escalation. and escalation meant desperation. The morning after, I woke at 5:12 a.m. to the sound of my phone vibrating across the nightstand. Unknown number. I let it ring twice before answering. Olivia Harper, I said evenly. A pause. Then a familiar voice. Liv. Mark. Not Ethan. Mark never called alone. What do you want? I asked. You need to drop this, he said quietly. Not aggressive. Not mocking. Just strained. Drop what? The forensic review. The subpoenas. All of it. So he knew. Sandra had filed motions overnight to subpoena financial records from Harper Medical Investments, specifically transfers linked to Dr. Voss. You think I'm bluffing? I asked. You don't understand what you're digging into. I understand exactly. There was silence on the line. I could hear traffic in the background. Maybe he was in his car, maybe pacing outside his Upper East Side condo. Ethan didn't just invent this, Mark said carefully. My chest tightened. What does that mean? Another pause. Then he said the one thing I didn't expect. Dad was changing the will again. The words hit like ice water. What? He met with his estate attorney 3 weeks before he died. That's not possible, I said. The will was finalized 6 months before his death. I'm telling you what I know. Changing it how? He was planning to reduce Ethan's controlling rights in the medical firm. My pulse spiked. Why? He said Ethan was becoming too aggressive. Too exposed. Too exposed. Exposed to what? Mark, I said slowly. Did Ethan know? He found out. Of course he did. And Dad died 2 weeks later. I finished quietly. Mark didn't respond. But he didn't deny it either. Doubt. That conversation sat in my chest like a stone. I had never truly believed Ethan harmed Dad. Yes, I questioned pressure. Stress. Manipulation. But not murder. Not deliberate harm. Now, I didn't know what I believed. Dad had a heart condition. Mild managed. But stress exacerbates everything. And if he was confronting Ethan about control, about power, I pushed the thought away. Speculation is dangerous. Especially in court. The forensic bombshell. 3 days later, Sandra burst into my apartment without knocking. Something she never did. They moved money, she said. How much? $4 million. My breath caught. From where? From Harper Medical Investments. 2 days before your father died. To where? An offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Ethan's signature authorized it. Date stamped. Time stamped. And the purpose listed? Strategic liquidity adjustment. Is that illegal? I asked. Not automatically, Sandra said. But timing matters. 2 days before Dad collapsed. 2 days before the estate would freeze operational changes. 2 days before control shifted. My hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from clarity forming. Get the estate attorney, I said. We met with Charles Davenport in his Midtown office. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, framed degrees from Yale. He looked uncomfortable the moment Sandra presented the documents. Yes, he admitted. Richard contacted me regarding amendments. What kind of amendments? I asked. He was considering restructuring voting power within the firm. In whose favor? Davenport hesitated. In yours. Silence. The air changed. He said you had stronger ethical oversight instincts. That sounded like Dad. Why wasn't it changed? Sandra asked. He postponed the signing. Said he wanted one final meeting with Ethan. And did that meeting happen? Yes. When? 2 days before his death. The same day as the $4 million transfer. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. What was the outcome of that meeting? I asked quietly. Davenport swallowed. Richard left angry. Angry. With a heart condition. After confronting a son about financial control. I closed my eyes briefly. Not murder. But stress. Pressure. Conflict. Sometimes you don't need poison to cause damage. Sometimes ego is enough. The courtroom atmosphere had shifted. This wasn't about competency anymore. This was about credibility. Sandra requested permission to introduce financial evidence tied to motive for manipulating my psychiatric record. Caldwell objected fiercely. But the judge allowed limited exploration. Ethan took the stand again. He looked composed, but the edges were cracking. Mr. Harper, Sandra began smoothly, did you authorize a $4 million transfer from Harper Medical Investments 2 days before your father's death? Yes, Ethan replied. For what purpose? Operational liquidity. Sandra held up a document. To a Cayman Islands account not previously used by the firm? It was strategic. Was your father aware? A beat. Yes. Did he approve? Another beat. He didn't object. Sandra stepped closer. Isn't it true your father was preparing to amend his will to reduce your control over the firm? Objection. Overruled. Ethan's jaw tightened. He considered changes. And was he upset after meeting you about those changes? No, but his voice wasn't as steady. Sandra leaned in. Did he threaten to remove you entirely? No. Too fast. Too sharp. The courtroom felt electric. Then Sandra delivered the strike. Did you pressure Dr. Leonard Voss to alter your sister's psychiatric record after your father's death? No. Did you pay him $250,000? It was a consulting fee. For a 40-minute evaluation? Silence. The judge leaned forward. Ethan's composure flickered. And in that flicker, the mask slipped. Just slightly. That night, I received another call. Not from Mark. Not from an unknown number. From a nurse. An ICU nurse at St. Vincent's. Ms. Harper, she said nervously. I took care of your father the night he came in. My throat tightened. Yes, there was a disagreement in the ER. My chest went still. Between who? Your father and your brother. Which brother? Ethan. My vision narrowed. What kind of disagreement? He insisted on transferring your father to a private cardiac unit immediately. Against protocol. Why? He said he had connections. Connections. Investors. Board members. Power. Did the transfer happen? Yes. Did it delay treatment? A pause. By 42 minutes. 42 minutes. In cardiac care. That matters. Why are you telling me this? I whispered. Because it didn't feel right. The world tilted slightly. Not intentional harm, but ego overriding medical protocol. Power interfering with urgency. I hung up and stared at the skyline outside my window. Lights blinking across the city. Somewhere in this vast machine of steel and ambition, my father had taken his last breath. And maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to happen when it did. Ethan didn't kill Dad, but he may have delayed the care that could have saved him. Because control mattered more than process. Image mattered more than protocol. And when Dad tried to reduce his power, Ethan fought back. Not with violence, but with influence. The same influence he used against me. Sandra filed an emergency motion to expand the hearing scope. From competency to potential fiduciary misconduct. The judge granted a special session. Full evidentiary review. Public record. Media frenzy. And this time, Michael Reyes wouldn't just confirm altered files. He would testify about ER protocol violations, about board pressure, about investor interference in medical operations. And if he did, Ethan wouldn't just lose the conservatorship case. He could lose everything. But power doesn't collapse quietly, and desperate men make dangerous decisions. As I left the courthouse that evening, rain pouring down in sheets, I noticed something across the street. A black SUV. Engine running. Windows tinted. Parked. Watching. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Again. I answered. A distorted voice spoke calmly. You're about to destroy more than your brother. Click. The line went dead. I stood in the rain, heart steady. Because for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I was certain. And certainty is more dangerous than fear. The final hearing was set for Monday. And when the hospital director took the stand, the truth wouldn't just surface. It would explode. Monday morning, Lower Manhattan felt like it was bracing for impact. News vans lined Center Street. Satellite dishes tilted toward the gray sky. Coffee carts did record business as reporters rehearsed live intros about the Harper inheritance scandal. The wind coming off the East River cut sharp between the buildings, snapping suit jackets and carrying that familiar scent of rain-soaked concrete. Inside the courthouse, the air was electric. This wasn't about mental competency anymore. This was about power, and whether it could bend truth without breaking it. I stood at the defense table, hands steady, navy blazer pressed, hair pulled back. No visible cracks. No tremor. Across the aisle, Ethan looked composed, but thinner somehow. Like sleep hadn't visited him much lately. Mark avoided everyone's eyes. The judge entered. Gavel struck. Proceed. And with that, the hospital director took the stand. Michael Reyes walked forward with the calm gravity of someone who understood exactly what this moment meant. Not just for me. For himself. For the hospital. For the invisible network of investors who believed influence made them untouchable. He took the oath. Sandra stood. Director Reyes, does St. Vincent's Medical Center have established emergency cardiac protocols? Yes. Are those protocols designed to minimize treatment delays? Yes. On the night Richard Harper was admitted, were those protocols followed? Silence. You could hear camera shutters clicking. No, Reyes said. A ripple swept the room. Why not? Sandra pressed. There was an immediate request for transfer to a private cardiac unit. Who made that request? Reyes looked directly at Ethan. Ethan Harper. Caldwell shot up. Objection. Overruled. Sandra stepped closer. Did that transfer cause a delay in treatment? Yes. How long? Approximately 40 minutes. The number landed like a weight. Is 40 minutes significant in cardiac emergency care? Yes. Could it affect survival probability? A long pause. Yes. The courtroom didn't breathe. Sandra paced slowly. Director Reyes, was there financial tension between Richard Harper and Ethan Harper prior to Richard's death? Yes. Did Richard Harper express concerns about investor interference in medical operations? Yes. Specifically regarding his son? Another pause. Yes. Sandra let the silence stretch. Then she delivered it. Director Reyes, did the hospital board feel pressure from Harper Medical Investments after Richard Harper's death? Yes. Did that pressure include encouragement to cooperate in legal matters regarding Olivia Harper? Yes. Did that include tolerance of an altered psychiatric report? Yes. Gasps. The judge leaned forward. You are admitting institutional failure. Reyes didn't look away. Yes, Your Honor. In that moment, I saw something shift inside him. Not fear. Relief. Truth has a strange way of lifting weight even as it drops consequences. Caldwell called Ethan again. This time, there was no smooth smile. Just tension. Mr. Harper, Caldwell began carefully. Did you intend harm to your father? No. Did you believe transferring him to a private unit would improve care? Yes. Sandra rose for cross-examination. Mr. Harper, did your father oppose your recent financial decisions? Yes. Did he intend to reduce your control over Harper Medical Investments? He considered changes. Were you aware he planned to give greater voting authority to your sister? Silence. Yes. And 2 days later, you transferred $4 million offshore? Yes. And the same day he confronted you about control, he collapsed. Yes. Sandra stepped closer. Mr. Harper, is it possible your insistence on control cost your father precious time in the ER? No. But his voice cracked. And that crack said more than denial ever could. Sandra's final question came like a blade. Did you alter your sister's psychiatric record to eliminate the one person your father trusted to challenge you? Ethan didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched. Then, no. But he didn't look at the judge. He looked at me, and in his eyes, for the first time, was something unfamiliar. Regret. After hours of testimony, arguments, and rebuttals, the judge called for recess. The wait felt endless. I stood by the tall courthouse window, watching yellow taxis blur through wet streets. New York didn't stop for family wars. It never had. Sandra stood beside me. Whatever happens, she said quietly, you held your ground. That mattered more than the inheritance. More than the money. Because this was never about cash. It was about identity. About refusing to let someone define you as unstable simply because you stood in their way. The courtroom doors opened. We returned to our seats. The judge entered. He adjusted his glasses. This court finds insufficient evidence to declare Ms. Olivia Harper mentally incompetent. A breath released inside my chest. Furthermore, evidence suggests intentional manipulation of medical documentation and fiduciary misconduct. Ethan's shoulders stiffened. The matter of financial irregularities and hospital protocol violations will be referred for criminal investigation. The gavel struck. And just like that, it was over. Ethan didn't look at me as federal investigators approached him outside the courthouse. Mark did. For a moment, we just stood there, siblings in the cold Manhattan wind. You didn't have to destroy him, Mark said quietly. I didn't, I replied. He destroyed himself. Mark's eyes were tired. He was scared. So was I. Fear just shows who you really are. Spring came to New York like it always does, sudden and unapologetic. Cherry blossoms in Central Park. Open-air cafes in Soho. Joggers along the Hudson River. Harper Medical Investments underwent restructuring. Ethan stepped down pending investigation. The hospital implemented strict firewall policies between investors and clinical decisions. And me? I made a choice. I sold half my stake in the firm. Used the capital to create something new. The Richard Harper Ethical Medical Oversight Foundation, dedicated to protecting patient care from investor interference. At the opening press conference, I stood at a podium outside the hospital. Reporters watched. Cameras rolled. Why do this? Someone asked. I looked at the skyline. Because no one should lose precious minutes in an emergency because someone powerful wanted control. One evening, months later, Ethan asked to meet. We sat across from each other at a quiet restaurant in Brooklyn Heights. No lawyers. No cameras. Just siblings. I never meant for Dad to, he trailed off. I know, I said. He looked surprised. I meant to protect what he built. You meant to own it, I corrected gently. Silence. I thought you were weak, he admitted. I smiled slightly. You thought wrong. For the first time in months, there was no hostility. Just consequence. You really believe I didn't kill him? He asked. I met his eyes. I believe you loved him. And sometimes, love mixed with ego does damage it never intended. On a warm June night, I stood on my balcony again. The city glowed beneath me. Alive. Restless. Unapologetic. They tried to label me unstable. Tried to silence me with paperwork and influence. But here's the truth about power in America. It doesn't just belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to the one who refuses to back down. My father once told me I saw things others didn't. He was right. I saw the cracks, the pressure points, the invisible threads between money and medicine. And instead of breaking, I pulled. And when the hospital director took the stand, the truth didn't just save my inheritance. It saved my name. Grief does not make you weak. Questioning power does not make you unstable. And when someone tries to rewrite your identity for their convenience, stand up, because silence is what corruption counts on.